bucka. Haha. You know the deal.
The next thing we're going to talk about in ratios is what's called unit price. Unit price is a very practical skill to have in that it's very handy when you're shopping, especially if you want to compare the prices of things. To start here, though, we're just going to talk about what unit price is. The first example we're going to look at is if 12 apples cost $4.20. Well, unit price basically means what is the cost of one, usually. There are exceptions to that, but typically we're talking about the cost of one. And if we're going to use ratios to calculate the unit price here, we're going to write this relationship as a ratio. And usually when we're writing a ratio, money goes first in that ratio. Time pretty much always goes second, but money goes first. And that's because money is the dependent variable. The total cost here depends on the number of apples. So we're going to put the total cost here first. And the total cost is $4.20. And it's $4.20 for every 12 apples. So we would write that as $4.20 to 12. Well, in unit price, as I said, what we're really asking is what is the price of one apple? So we have to change this ratio so that the number of apples is 1. And the number of apples was the second value here because the first value was how much money. As always with unit price, we put the amount of money first in the ratio. To change 12 to 1, we have to divide it by 12. So that's the same thing that we're going to do to $4.20. Now this is where having a calculator comes in really handy. Unlike the previous examples of ratios that we've seen, these examples almost always involve decimals because we're dealing with money. So we have to divide 4.2 or 4.20 divided by 12. And what we get is 0.35. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that one apple costs 35 cents. Or another way to say that is it's 35 cents per apple. So let's look at the next example where we can buy 3 bags of milk and it costs $1.80. Well, if we're going to calculate the unit cost here, again, we want to know the cost of one bag of milk. So if we're going to use ratios to figure that out, we're always going to put money first in the ratio because the total cost depends on the number of bags of milk that we buy. And here it's $1.80 for every 3. Well, with unit price, almost all the time we're changing that second value to 1 because we want to know how much one bag of milk costs. To change 3 to 1, we divide it by 3, so that's what we have to do to 1.80. When you divide 1.80 divided by 3 in your calculator, what you get is 0.6. Now, what you have to realize, though, is that we're dealing with money here, and with money, we always include what's in the tenths and the hundredths. So, really, if we get 0.6, that's 60 cents. So, one bag of milk costs 60 cents. If we keep going here, it's $20.97 for 3 pounds of salmon. So again, if we're going to use a ratio here to calculate the unit cost, we want to know how much 1 pound of salmon cost. So money goes first, then the number of pounds, and for the unit price, we want to reduce that down to 1. So we have to divide it by 3. And so that's what we have to do to 20.97 is divide it by 3. And we get 6.99. And what does that tell us? Well, that 1 pound of salmon costs $6.99. Now, with the next two examples, we have an exception to reducing the ratio so that the second value is 1. So I'm going to start by writing the next example as a ratio. So just as always, the amount of money goes first. That's our dependent variable. And then we're going to put the amount of pasta that we get here, which is 750 grams. Now, if we were to reduce that to 1 gram, 1 gram of pasta is a very small amount of pasta. And it's not practical to talk about such a small amount of pasta, and it would be very little in terms of money as well. So typically when we're dealing with grams or milliliters, we reduce it not down to 1, but usually down to 100. So this is where the math gets a little bit more tricky. Unlike with the previous examples where we were just reducing to 1, here we have to think about, well, how do we change 750 to 100? We have to divide it or multiply it. We're going to divide it. And again, if you use your calculator, you should be able to figure out that you're dividing it by 7.5. So that's what you have to do to 2.40 as well, is divide it by 7.5. Similar idea with milliliters. We'll start again by just writing this as a ratio, where the amount of money goes first, and then the amount of orange juice, in this case, is our second value in our ratio. And again with milliliters, if we were to reduce that to 1 milliliter of juice, 1 milliliter is a very small amount, and it would cost so little, probably less than a cent. So it's not practical to describe the cost of things in those terms. So usually with milliliters, just like with grams, we reduce it down to 100. This one's a little bit easier to change 500 to 100. We don't have a decimal involved here. We just have to divide by 5. So that's what we have to do to $5.50. And again, when you do that on your calculator, you'll find you'll get 1.1. But remember, we have to include that value that's in the hundredths as well. So that's really $1.10. And what that means is 100 milliliters is $1.10. And the next time you go to the grocery store, most grocery stores now, if you look at the price, they also do give the unit price as well. So if you look at the cost of orange juice, it'll tell you how much the orange juice costs, but it will also usually tell you how much it is per 100 milliliters. And what that enables you to do is look at the other prices, and it's not just about how much that can of juice costs. If it's a different amount, you want to know what the unit price is. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is comparing unit. So to finish off our lesson on unit price, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things here. So for each pair of prices here, find the unit cost as described in the previous examples. So essentially find the cost for one, except for the third question. And then state which is the better price. So which one is the better deal, the first one or the second one? Now with the last question, you'll notice that it's milk, it's a liquid, and that the first price is at 750 milliliters. So just like with the previous example, we have to reduce that to 100 milliliters. Now what's even a little bit trickier about this one is I've said it's $9 for 1 liter. So you have to remember, we have to use the same units here. If we're going to compare unit rates, we can't compare milliliters to liters. So what I would suggest you do there is change 1 liter to milliliters. So it's $9 for however many milliliters 1 liter is. And then calculate the unit cost and state which one is the better price. If you're able to do that, congratulations, you now have a firm understanding of unit price.